It appears Donald Trump has survived a second assassination attempt at his golf course in Florida, and we've already descended into narrative chaos, as can be expected. Depending on who you talk to, it's staged like the first one, like people said, or it's the deep state, or it didn't happen at all, or you name it, everyone's saying it. We still don't know anything, and it's just spinning out of control, and we're going to talk about it. And Wernher von Braun in 1948. The ghosts are just running amok in this house, right in the middle of everything, aren't they, Alex?
Oh yeah, no, it's just me tonight. That's I'll admit it.
What was I saying? I was going to say Wernher von Braun in 1948 wrote a book called The Mars Project. And if you don't know who von Braun is, he's Hitler's favorite scientist who built the V-2 rockets that was then hired by the American government to be part of NASA to build the rockets that went into so-called space. But in that book in 1948 that von Braun wrote, he said that when humans colonize Mars, the people running Mars, the government that is there, the leader of that government will be called Elon, which is interesting, isn't it? Or maybe not at all. I don't believe in coincidences. Do you believe in coincidences, Alex?
I think I do.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I don't know if I do anymore.
Really?
Actually, I know I don't anymore.
I question everything now.
Yeah.
This show is really taking me down a rabbit hole of things.
But it's a crazy day. Here we are once again.
Yes, we are. Here we
shortly after another deranged bit of news in Florida with Trump, and it's just hard to know anything. Nothing's confirmed. There's pictures out there of supposed alleged assassin. Who knows what's real? I'm not getting emotional about anything yet, other than that fact that reality is disintegrating and X is accelerating it. And not just X, it's not unique to X. It's been happening for quite some time. It's a human condition. So it's actually really great that we have Drew on today, if we want to bring Drew on, to talk about the programming going on in the world. Drew, what is up? Tell us who you are, and let's get into it.
Hey, I'm Drew. I go by Drutang Reborn on Twitter, and yeah, I basically am a conspiracy theory author, I would say, and I guess the title I've given myself is information trafficker. It's generally my trade. I trade in rare and valuable information. So yeah, no, I'm excited for this convo today. A lot of stuff, like you mentioned, Wernher von Braun and of course, the Trump assassination attempts now, plural.
So, sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh yeah, it's just it all kind of follows. The scripts. All these things, like Trump having a head wound. It's talked about in Revelation. The beast gets a head wound, miraculously recovers, and then the world follows him into the beast kingdom. But anyways, yeah, plenty of stuff to talk about. It should be fun.
Yeah, we have a bunch to talk about, and we'll get to that as well. And when you say you're a conspiracy theorist author, all I hear is I'm a historian, because it seems to be a lot of the things that sound crazy to people turn out to be just fact. I forget we peddle in this insane information of conspiracy theories, and when I talk to people in the real world who don't think about this stuff at all, God bless them, it's like they look at me like I have three heads. They're like, no, there's no way. They don't believe Operation Paperclip, and that's a fairly easy one to believe,
Yeah, it's in the Marvel movies.
Right. They're like, no way. Why would we love NASA? It couldn't be Nazis. Da 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 da. But let's get to all that in just a bit. When it comes to today, and we see this news happening, we see a second attempt allegedly on Trump's life. What are you thinking, and how? Where were you with the last one? Just 2 months ago.
Yeah, I had just come in from the beach here in Miami, and my friends. I had a couple of friends over, and we were distracted in conversation. I open up my phone and I see the video, and the video, at first, it's hard to tell what's going on because it's, the clip was just, bing, 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 and then he grabs his ear and goes down. You can't really tell what's happening initially. And, people are saying BB gun, and people are, there's all types of theories about what was going on in the confusion of the news breaking. But yeah, it was both shocking and kind of, expected. I think there was one other attempt on Trump's life before documented, where a guy tried to grab a gun off one of his security guards or police officers at one of the rallies. But it's definitely, my thing is predictive programming, kind of trying to predict the future, which I have a fairly good track record of. But predicting the future based off of basically the programming that the masses have received through our shared cultural mythology, which is kind of every culture has done this. The pharaohs of Egypt, they ruled by authority of Horus and Osiris, their mythology, their gods. The pharaoh in life was said to be the incarnation of Horus, and in death, Osiris. Osiris was a killed king, assassinated by Set, and Horus was his resurrected son. And that is at the core of this whole Trump assassination thing. It's a motif called the killing of the king ritual, in which you have a martyr king that is killed by his own people, say Julius Caesar, Jesus Christ, and then basically rulers rule by the authority of that killed king. So, for instance, the Roman emperors called themselves Caesar. They gave themselves the title Caesar, just like you were talking about with Wernher von Braun's book, The Mars Project, in which he says that the title given to the leader of the human Mars colony is Elon. It's not the leader's name, it's the title that he's given. So just like Caesar is the name of a person, right, but it's also the title. It's the same motif. So yeah, it fits. In terms of that, so I wasn't necessarily surprised by the assassination attempt.
When you say you're not surprised, when you say you're not surprised, is it because of what you're saying, looking at the history and these narratives are cyclical, and you already tapped in at that point, thinking this is what's going to play out because this is what happens throughout human history. Yeah. Basically, Trump. There is for the last couple of years, I've been. My research and my work, my second book is called American Apocalypse X, and it's I made the cover 2 years ago, and it's basically Trump, Musk, and Kanye photoshopped over the Avengers Infinity War cover. Musk as Iron Man, obviously. Trump as Captain America with a Q on his chest, and of course Kanye as the Black Panther. His dad was in the Black Panthers. Yep. But now you see Trump and other people making all these Justice League memes and Avenger memes. And, it's funny to see it organically, quote unquote, organically come up because it is, these themes. That's one instance. The killing of the king in relation to Trump was another thing I was expecting, along with the Avengers motif. So yeah, that's why I kind of expected it. Can you explain the killing of the king for those who don't know?
Yeah, so it's all based off of what I was saying earlier with the ancient Egyptians. They basically, their mythology. So the most known stories and archetypes and characters of their civilization basically revolved around their two main gods, the father Osiris and the son Horus. And essentially the myth is that Osiris was killed by Set, his archetypal enemy. He was cut up into 14 pieces, and the pieces were scattered. His wife Isis retrieves and reassembles him, 13 pieces of him, except for his phallus, which was eaten by a fish. That's right. Famously. So if you ever seen that picture of John Podesta where he has his hands up and he has 14 on one hand and he has the fish on the other, that's what it's in reference to. And yeah, so what happens is she resurrects him by reassembling the 13 pieces and then crafting him in artificial, kind of in a almost transhumanist way, an artificial phallus that they then use to conceive his son Horus. And it's kind of his son, but it's also kind of his resurrection. It's kind of seen as his reincarnation. But because he's not 100% organic, he's forced to be delegated to the underworld, the afterlife. So he ends up ruling the afterlife, and Horus then goes on to defeat Set rather, out in the land of the living. So the pharaohs of Egypt, they would say in life, they would rule by the authority of Horus. They were seen as a reincarnation of Horus. And the last pharaoh that died, they would become Osiris. And now their son, resurrected as Horus, would take over ruling the land of the living. So that is basically the motif of the killing of the king ritual. And like I said, those pharaohs, because of that myth and that mythology and their leader being a martyr, or, the myth of the martyr, that same exact thing you saw happen when the Roman Republic fell and with the rise of the Roman Empire. You have Caesar. He gets voted out of power on January 7th, 49 BC, so the Roman Senate could prosecute him through the legal system. He'd lose his legal immunity. Just so happens Donald Trump was voted out of power on the exact same day, 2,070 years later, on January 7th, 2021, only because of the totally organic January 6th insurrection, quote unquote.
Right.
Basically, yeah, so you have Caesar. He gets voted out of power on Jan 7th. This begins the Roman Civil War. He crosses the Rubicon, brings his armies into Rome, basically starts the Roman Civil War. He ends up winning this Roman Civil War. I know Tim Pool would be a big fan of hearing that there's a cyclical civil war that seems to fit in this era.
Yep.
He ends up winning. He rules. He's not technically the emperor at this point, but when he is killed, when the Senate kills him in the famous Ides of March, he's killed by his own people. Then not his actual son, not his blood son, but his basically adopted son, Octavian, ends up going through a power struggle, becomes the first emperor, and then since that point, all the Roman emperors called themselves Caesar. They gave them the title Caesar, and basically ruled by the authority of their killed king. In America, this is one big thing with Trump, is we've had two major killed kings. We had Abraham Lincoln, who basically ended the idea of a federation of states, and it became one federal entity. Before it was the United States, and then afterwards it was, the United States.
Right.
If you understand what I'm saying.
Right.
There's a line in National Treasure. Nick Cage says it a lot better than me. But we actually have the same birthday, Jan 7th, Nick Cage.
Really?
But
is that a coincidence? Maybe not.
Yeah. So anyways, he fits the Caesar role. Same exact thing. You rule by the authority of the killed king. We have Abraham Lincoln and JFK.
Yeah.
If you notice, a lot of the mythology that supports Donald Trump as a political savior and populist revolves around the JFK assassination, especially very recently with the alliance with RFK Jr., who he's got like a quadruple killing of the king ritual going on.
Yeah,
RFK,
seriously.
JFK Jr., and he's the last man standing, and now he's in alliance with Trump. Of course, Trump with the QAnon lore that kind of turned that mythology, allowed Trump to kind of gain this archetype that he's embodying right now in his most ardent supporters. Without QAnon, there would be no Jan 6. There would be no QAnon shaman as the poster child for it.
Right.
Without QAnon, and a lot of QAnon had to do with JFK Jr. There was a lot of talk within that community of Trump's friendship with JFK Jr. and how Trump was basically in alignment with the Kennedy family and kind of avenging. Kennedy is basically the poster child for where I said Abraham Lincoln kind of created this federal entity and created this, tyranny of centralization of power.
Yep.
JFK he represents a different civil war that he didn't win. He lost against the deep state, against CIA. So now you have Trump basically going to rule by the authority of the killed King JFK. And the cycle perpetuates.
So I want to go back to a few things you said.
You explained it really well, but I think I need the cliff notes.
No, that was great. And I want to go back to one, without getting too much on a tangent, but you brought up the severed phallus thing, and it's hard not to talk about that and not talk about Washington, D.C., the obelisk. Can you explain, do you see the connection there? Perfect. And if so, can you explain that for us?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was trying to think of, I had already gone on a long rant, but I wanted to bring that up. So the phallus part is extremely important, and it kind of goes back, it is remarkable how similar every single major shift of empire has happened. It's just, they're using literally the exact same monuments in many cases.
Yeah. So
you have the obelisks, famously in ancient Egypt. Everyone's familiar with them, the big, tall, pointy, phallic objects.
Yep.
In the older dynasties of Egypt, they kind of went through different phases of what their main gods were.
Yep.
Basically, the cult of priests kind of switched over their mythology as time went on, as they kind of switching over of an empire's lore, like we just talked about with our Abraham Lincoln and JFK. And Abraham Lincoln being killed, people that really galvanized the Union and made it okay. Well, our leader, he's killed. You understand? Yep. But anyways, after Abraham Lincoln was killed, they finally finished the Washington Monument.
That's right.
Which is kind of a double killing of the king. And what's interesting about Washington himself, he actually died because he got bloodletted. He was killed by his doctor.
I didn't know that.
He was sick, but they were bloodletting him. Huh. And they blame it on the disease or whatever, but they were draining this guy, literally, stabbing him and bleeding him out.
Which was big back then, right? It wasn't it was not a rare thing. That's what people thought they could do that to heal ailments of various degrees.
Yep. Using using a needle, which the word obelisk, the Greek root of the word obelisk means needle.
Oh man.
And Trump's obelisk is the vaccine needle.
Warp speed.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you have the Washington Monument for Abraham Lincoln, and of course this represents the phallus of Osiris, and that's what in ancient Egypt, I guess this is what I was getting to, was before the cult of Osiris took over, it was the cult of Ra that was dominant. Ra is just a plain Jane sun god, really no in-depth lore, unlike Osiris and Horus. And basically the obelisk represented at that time just the rays of the sun, which is a male phallic. It's the same, like the cross is a sun symbol as well. If you look directly at the sun during the day, it forms a cross in your vision, just from the rays. But the obelisk, they took on a new meaning after the cult of Osiris took over from the cult of Ra. And essentially they repurposed these obelisks, as we'll see will happen with the Roman Empire going forward, but they repurposed the obelisk to now represent the phallus of Osiris. And basically when you have Octavian, like we talked about, he comes, the crowning achievement, what really solidified the Roman Empire, was he defeated his main enemy, who was basically sleeping with Cleopatra, who had also Caesar had also been with, and actually conceived a son with. He had Caesarion, who funny enough, Cleopatra had basically branded Caesarion as Horus. There's sculptures that they had made of the hawk, Horus, and a child standing underneath this hawk, which was Caesarion. So she saw Caesarion, the son of Caesar and Cleopatra, the fusion of Egypt and Rome, to be a Horus figure that would unite the two dynasties. Because at this point, Cleopatra was still basically fulfilling the pharaonic line. But Octavian came in and he kills Caesarion, he kills Cleopatra, and so he ends the pharaonic line, and basically merges the empire completely. Just completely gets rid of this. I guess the estimate is maybe 4,000 years of unbroken pharaonic line, and destroys them. Egypt is still the center of basically education and thinking and learning for a while afterwards. Although Caesar, during Caesar's civil war, he did burn down the Library of Alexandria famously, which kind of, it was a big hit to the knowledge of the world at that point. It was kind of its own great reset. Yeah. Because basically any knowledge from before that point in history was effectively destroyed. There was a lot of it was saved, and it wouldn't be fully destroyed. There was a second library that was destroyed shortly after the Council of Nicaea and the establishment of Christianity as the main religion of Rome. But anyways, there was a great reset during this time. The Romans end up taking these obelisks. The obelisk sitting in front in Vatican Square. There's an obelisk in the middle, and that now has a cross on the top. So just like the cult of Osiris repurposed the obelisk from being a sun rays to an Osiris phallus, we have the Romans that moved this same obelisk. I believe it was from Heliopolis to Alexandria to Rome, moving through the different centers of power. It's erected in what was originally Nero's circus, which famously Nero persecuted the early Christians and supposedly crucified the first pope, which again, the pope rules by the authority of this killed king. Peter was crucified upside down in Nero's circus. Right. And the obelisk that's still standing in the Vatican today was erected. It's the only obelisk in Rome to never fall. And it is still there. And it was there when Peter was crucified upside down by Nero.
So do you feel like the obelisk in DC is just directly connected to the same idea throughout time? That that's the same entity?
So the Washington Monument is, I believe, I forget if it's meters or feet, whatever the designation is, but it ends up being 666 feet tall, I believe. Yeah, that's right. And in gematria, Nero's name breaks down to 666, which is why people they point to 666 as the number of the beast in Revelation. They point to that. They say, "Oh, that's not like predicting a future thing." He was just talking about Nero. So, anyways, there's deep connections, and the Washington Monument is obviously a perpetuation of that exact same.
And it should be noted real quick for those who don't know. I believe Nero also famously took a young boy and made it his wife, and made the young boy dress as his dead wife. Do you know that story?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Sounds about right.
Definitely matches. And then, famously ran a false flag where he burns down Rome and blames the Christians.
That's right.
Yeah, he's a great beast character, that's for sure.
That's right. So, and then going back to what you were saying earlier, in terms of the coincidence of all this, you mentioned that with the Caesar, I think it was on January 7th that they did that to him.
49 BC.
And then same thing with Trump. So when I asked Alex earlier if you believe in coincidence, same question to you. Do you believe this is all, when you say predictive programming, this has been set in stone for some time and it's just repeating itself? Is that what I gather?
Yeah, so there's two aspects to it. It's simultaneously chaos and order. I believe it's like Orbo de Chao or something like that. I'm totally mispronouncing the Latin, but it's a free Masonic emblem, and it's order out of chaos. Of course, well, it's on the. I believe it's on that emblem, and anyways, that's at the core of basically every question is how much is order, how much is chaos, right? And you could look at astrology for a similar thing, people see these astrological cycles play out, and it's, it could be that that people are looking for these astrological events and then performing actions based on that. So for instance, on January 12th of 2020, I was talking about this astrological event notice Saturn conjunct Pluto and Capricorn at 22 degrees. And it was every astrologist was talking about it as a huge shift. It's basically Saturn represents order, Pluto represents death. It's historically represents a huge shift in the current world order. For instance, the last time that happened was during the Reformation period, where the printing press had just been invented. There was a great decentralization of information. Martin Luther basically created the Protestant movement. Then they translated the Bible out of Latin into the languages of the people. So you had, the main book, the core mythology of that age. You no longer needed a priest to tell you what the stories were. You could read them yourself.
Right.
And so people were looking forward to this event, and then lo and behold, the worst case of it in the States was maybe a week or two after that, January 12th of 2020. So there's both the chaos aspect of just the planets aligning, which is, it's somewhat order, but it's not necessarily, logically, you wouldn't think that would actually affect things. But maybe people were waiting for that event to do certain things, or, it's a mix of both. And I think if there's a couple of ways you can experiment with this kind of quantum physics, famously the two-slit experiment. Mm-hmm. And there's also some pop culture things that have become relevant recently. Have you ever heard of randonauting?
Oh, I did, but I forget why. So it's help you locate things, I believe.
So essentially you have a bunch of not quantum computers, but as close as you can get currently.
Right.
You have quantum number generators, as random as physically possible, that we can make at this time. You give the program your GPS location and a certain radius around you, and you have the random number generators, as random as we can do, and hundreds of them.
Right.
They all generate numbers based off of your original GPS coordinates, gives you a random GPS location, and you go to that location. And the idea is, because we're implementing as much chaos as physically possible, just the slightest impact that human consciousness has on reality, as seen in the two-slit experiment, which you're familiar with it, right, Chin?
Oh, yeah. It was like observable, what's observable. Yep. Yeah.
Observing reality affects it. The idea is, because it's so random, we're creating max randomness, max chaos. Just a slight impact that our consciousness has on reality should impact it and influence the outcome. And there's been some crazy stories, people finding dead bodies at the at the points. And I've had a lot of much nicer, more wholesome experiences doing it. But that's ultimately the answer. Is it's a mix of order and chaos.
It seems like there's people who just know how to hack the chaos too. Or the other thing is, when I'm looking at the Trump assassination stuff, especially the first one, the Butler one, and now this new one, it seems like the people who want to carry out the bad stuff either know how to hack the chaos or use it as a cover, right? It's like the chaos becomes part of the entire plan, either for their cover or to throw everybody off what's really going on.
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain level of, this mix of order and chaos. There is a certain level of, cycles will repeat. Cycles are a natural thing in reality. We have seasons, we have multi-year, climate cycles as well. And you can, at some level you can influence them or whatever, on a local level, but there's an inevitability aspect to this. So, when we're talking about the connections between Caesar and Trump, in astrology, you have the yearly cycle. So, each month, Aquarius, it's kind of based off the moon cycle, months, moon. So you have it on a yearly basis, within the year, but then you also have what's called the precession of the equinox, which is basically, there's Plato's great year, which is essentially roughly 25,000 years, 26,000 years between that. where you have the equinox processes through different constellations. So we had when Caesar took power, it was processing through the age of Aries to the age of Pisces, and yeah, Pisces, the fish, which again we were talking about the fish earlier, and it's a symbol of Christianity as well. And then now we're going from, because it's been roughly 2,100 years, we're going from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, and we're seeing these essentially to the date same cycles occurring, where Trump is voted out of power on the exact same day as Caesar, 2,070 years later. And yeah, so there's an inevitability to it, but there's also, people are obviously influencing it in some ways. There are people making conscious decisions, whether or not they're doing it based off of the astrology.
Right.
It's like a chicken or the egg situation.
Right.
It's a paradox.
Do you think there's some cosmic force pushing these people to it, or is it that the people doing these things they like the symmetry of, carrying out these acts when certain things are aligned?
Undoubtedly. And, the people at the top are much more conscious of it. Those that are, gained the knowledge that's been passed down in these secret societies and these private education systems since Egypt had a priest class, and that same information has been kept private. They're not going to teach you that at a public college. It's been kept private for so long. So there are people who understand everything that's going on and are positioning themselves to, fulfill certain things. But, it really gets to the core question of free will. And the answer is nobody knows.
Of course.
Right. So where does this all go anyway?
It's an illusion, and it's impossible to know. I believe there's free will, but I also believe God knows that everything that's going down, but I also think there's a billion different ways for everything to go down. So when it comes to the killing of the king that you were talking about earlier, and then connecting that to what's going on with Trump now, they haven't done that yet. Like, that hasn't happened, right? It seems like they're trying to. So what do you make of the failed attempts, or what's to come then? What's the goal?
So this is
skip forward the chapters a little bit here.
What's that?
I'm just saying, skip forward the chapters of the Greek mythology, just like.
I've only covered 2,000 years of seemingly unconnected events in 15 minutes, but so
doing great.
Hopefully the audience is hanging in there, but yeah, I think it's. What was your last question there?
When it comes to like the killing of the king narrative that you were saying, they haven't done that with Trump. It hasn't been successful yet. What is your take on that then? What is the take on the failed attempts, alleged attempts, and then what comes after that?
So it's just not time yet. I would predict, I'm fairly certain they are going to succeed eventually. Hopefully not. But he has to win the Civil War first in terms of the narrative that play out. They had a Roman Civil War that ended the Republic and basically gave rise to the Empire. So, we haven't had that yet. And I think, we're getting so close now. It's, we're going to see some, increasingly crazy shit happen.
So can you explain like what you think that might be? Like, what does that look like? Is that hot war? Is that a more local country, nationwide civil war? Is that a more global thing? Because it seems like, we got stories just the other day about about Biden saying to Zelensky, you can use our Western missiles to launch into Russia. Putin saying that's World War III. It's like, what are we anticipating? What do you anticipate?
You don't want to be surprised?
So domestically, the as far as the predictive programming, I think the most accurate and most prominent and effective that we've already seen play out is the Purge movies, which Jared Kushner just happened to hire the PR guy from the Purge movies onto the White House staff. The Purge movie started in 2013.
I didn't know that.
Right around the time that BLM started.
Wow.
And what's the Purge movies about? It's about very select times where there's complete lawlessness. You can get away with anything. You can loot. You can rob. And it's extra effective if you wear a mask and completely dissociate yourself from your individual ego and completely submit to mob psychology, which we saw 100% during COVID.
Wow.
And that's 7 years of programming there. Not to mention they had a specific 2016 Purge election year movie where they showed the Trump character trying to kill the Hillary character who wins.
That's right, man.
Which actually this is the interesting part about predictive programming, is that they give you fear porn scenarios. And then they kind of flip it to get a maximum emotional reaction, because when people think that the timeline isn't right, when things go how people expect, they're fine. Like, for instance, 9/11, everybody had been programmed to know that the Twin Towers were going to be destroyed in a terrorist attack from a million different angles. So when it happened,
from movies,
they weren't necessarily questioning what's wrong. They were, okay, well, it happened, and, we're just going to go to war with the bad guys, just like I saw in various, in the fucking Super Mario movie. But when things happen that, aren't to script.
I know this is like predictive programming 101, but for those who don't know, can you just run through a quick definition of what that is and some more examples?
So yeah, since like I was talking about before, how you rule a civilization is you synchronize the minds of the masses. This is something that Plato talked about in his dialogues, The Republic, where he talks about how to create a ideal civilization. And he talked about, there's a quote that's attributed to him that's kind of a paraphrasing of this text, where the quote is, "They who tell the stories rule society." That's not actually in the dialogues, but it's a paraphrasing of what he talks about. And he basically explains the significance of the stories that are told to the youth of a country, teaches them what archetypes to look for, what's a hero, what's a villain, what's good, what's evil, what's more important, individual freedom or, which way should you turn? Should you pull the lever on the railroad? Should you run over one person or run over the baby or run over 20 old people? And essentially, that mythology, putting out a mythology and a shared mindset of the entire civilization, is how you get them to operate effectively. So, like we've talked about before, we have Egypt, they have their mythology. We have Rome, they have their mythology, which is their, God mythology was kind of stolen from the Egyptians, and then they moved to Christianity.
It's always rebranded.
Yeah. Yeah, just slight rebranding. And of course, Jesus is it's a killed king that's resurrected. It's Father, Son. Basically, in modern America, predictive programming, our shared mythology, as we move Nietzsche talked about what was needed for Western civilization as we moved away from a Christian world. In a post-Christian world, he talked about the need for an Ubermensch, a Superman for the population to aspire to be. And of course, this is when we have the creation of both the DC and Marvel Universe comics, where you have basically a identical pantheon of gods, mainly the sun and moon archetypes, Superman and Batman, Captain America, Iron Man, which are both Ubermensches in their own way, but it shows, particularly in the Marvel movies, you can see how the Captain America character is basically, falls away in the technocracy, and Iron Man's more powerful in the end. But I guess to your original question, predictive programming, the stories that you tell your civilization will not only form how they react to situations that you give them in real life, but it'll effectively, in a chaos magic way, which I think you mentioned earlier, Alan Moore. Alan Moore is a public student of Aleister Crowley, one of the most prolific occult magicians of the last century. And also Alan Moore says, yes, I'm a chaos magician. All art is chaos magic,
Right.
because any story proliferated through the masses will affect their subconscious and thus their actions and reactions to situations.
Right.
Especially subconscious reactions to situations where they're not thinking. They're not necessarily thinking with their conscious mind. They're kind of the lizard brain activates, and they have, because of the archetypes that they've seen in movies and the situations and emotions that those movies created in them, they naturally go for a certain situation, or they take a certain mode of action based on what they've seen on TV.
Right.
And of course, since the creation of motion picture, it was immediately used by the military for propaganda. They used to play in World War II. They'd play, military propaganda before every movie. And Captain America, of course, was used as propaganda to sell war bonds. Stan Lee himself, one of 9 people employed by the Army as a playwright during World War II. So he was making propaganda during World War II.
Right.
And he was their own killed king for the Marvel Universe. He died right before Endgame, even though he's technically in Endgame. So
yeah, it's crazy.
Anyways,
it seems like it's almost connected to last week we were talking with Jay Dyer about Bernays and the advertising, right, and how you can control a populace. And it seems like that's not. It seems like it's connected to a lot of this stuff too, with the propaganda and predictive programming, and how to control the perception of a people and keep them locked in. When it comes to the predictive programming stuff as well, you mentioned earlier the purge stuff, and was it Contagion about the virus, and that they had consultants from the government.
Perfect. I'm glad you brought that up again. You're pushing me right to my wheelhouse, Shane.
Good.
But yeah, the CDC was only, we only found out about this through a Freedom of Information request. But it turns out that the CDC spent $1.5 million on a liaison office to basically influence the script of the Contagion movie, which came out in 2011, just happened to be the 10-year anniversary of the anthrax attacks, which basically people talk about 9/11, but what was really important as the follow-up was anthrax, because 9/11 and in 2020, COVID, those events were planned at the same time. They were literally in the document that people point to as the basically, in a way, predictive programming, but this wasn't public facing. This was kind of more just admitting what their plans were. The Project for a New American Century, the think tank that had Dick Cheney, I believe Jeb Bush was on board, Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of State under Bush, or Secretary of Defense, I believe. But they were all on this think tank, and the think tank released a report in 2000 called, I believe it was Rebuilding America's Defenses. And in that report, it talks about not only the need for a new Pearl Harbor in order to implement the global kind of conquest, I guess you could say, what they wanted to do. They said, without a new Pearl Harbor, it would be hard to galvanize U.S. public support for a new series of wars. So they needed a terrorist attack. Also in that document that's lesser known is they talk about race-specific bioweapons, DNA-targeted bioweapons, which one of the major things RFK got in trouble for early in his campaign that everyone smeared him as anti-Semitic for was that he talked about how there's a study, it's not him saying it, there's a study that shows that COVID was more deadly towards people that were, European and African-American, or just African in general, I guess, but less effective against Ashkenazi Jews and Han Chinese, which are both very well-bred and homogenous societies that have very strong phenotype and DNA that very rarely intermix. So
he got flamed for that one.
Very easy to program something to not affect them. And yeah, so I see it as playing out in real life. And yeah, to get to your point, the CDC used that movie to play on the fears. Some of the first bioweapon legislation we got was because of anthrax. Mind you, the anthrax that was, famously the powder sent through the mail, it was only sent to government representatives that opposed the Patriot Act. So, and this is another thing that RFK talks about. So they only sent it to the guys who opposed the Patriot Act, and then as a bonus, this is what they always do. It's the Hegelian dialectic, which is, of course, the German philosopher, which the Germans used to basically, because Germany previously, that area was the Holy Roman Empire, right. The Second Reich. If you asked Hitler, that would be what he said. Yep. They united under the country, the nationalism of Germany, using these Hegelian dialectics. So, for instance, the Hegelian dialectic is thesis, antithesis, or antithetical statement. So you have the good thing, bad thing, and then problem, reaction, solution. So you create a problem, you get a reaction, you produce a solution. Right. So, for instance, in order for Hitler's Nazi Germany to take power and dissolve the civil rights of his opposition, they had the Reichstag fire, in which they blamed a single communist for burning down the Reichstag, which is basically, it's very similar to a Jan 6 March on the Capitol, or what's seen in Chaos Magician Alan Moore's V for Vendetta, where they march on the Capitol in masks. Of course, remember the 5th of November just happens to be the election this year.
That's right.
So anyways, they had the Reichstag fire. They used that fire to take away the civil rights of the people, arrest their opponents in the media. And you can see that play out. Obviously, 9/11 was that.
Like you were saying,
COVID was that.
The anthrax in the mail was basically a smaller version of what they were trying to do with the Pearl Harbor thing, right? Like they're trying to bring about this stuff. Or you can look at Northwoods. Operation Northwoods is basically the same thing. We're going to start this. We're going to do a false flag. We're going to create something bad to bring about what we think is quote unquote good. We did it. Well, I don't know. It's not confirmed if we did it, but NATO perhaps, with the help of us in the American government, did 20 years or so of false flags in Italy, post World War II with the years of lead. We had a ton of situations where the government just keeps doing this type of thing. We're going to create a problem.
Tonkin.
Yeah, right, exactly. We got into Vietnam because of that. And then you can go. We can go into so many different directions with Dolph Tonkin and Jim Morris and all this stuff, and how all this stuff starts to make me feel schizophrenic when you see all the connections. It's insane. But I want to shift into, because you were talking about Alan Moore. And we're talking about superheroes. I heard you talk about recently about Watchmen, and how I believe you think that was another example of predictive programming. I believe, were you talking about the graphic novel when you were saying that, or were you talking about the movie? Because they could both kind of be looked at as predictive programming. There's one
core difference that we'll get into between the two that is kind of important, but overall, it is extremely relevant.
Oh, I guess I should say also the TV show. Right, because even a TV show might be seen as predictive programming because of the racial violence that was taking place leading up to what would become the BLM summer. So what's your take on all that?
So this plays into, if you want to talk about what's coming next, what I see, you had the Roman Republic that fell and led to the rise of the Roman Empire. What I see happening here, we have the U.S. is of course a republic. But what rises afterwards is in my view, a technocratic new world order, an empire. And what is a technocracy? Well, you could ask Elon Musk's grandfather, who was arrested in Canada during World War II for leading the technocracy party. That's part of the reason why his family's from South Africa, because after the government arrests you for leading a threat to the government, to the social order of the country, you probably don't want to stick around too long. But technocracy is a society that's ruled by the experts. And who gets to decide who are the experts? Those guys, the guys who are ruling. So But, the public facing, it looks like, oh, science, it's ruled by science. If you ask any Reddit atheist, they're going to tell you, oh, yeah, that sounds amazing. If only we had science, dominating, then everything would be fine. And that's why they like Bill Gates and
Fauci.
And Fauci, especially, yeah. But what we're being prepared for is, in terms of predictive programming, the most powerful mythology of our age, which is an adaptation of the pantheons of gods of old, is what do we have today that's much more applicable to people and much more palatable, is instead of gods, you have, there's just superheroes, Captain America, well, he was just, biologically enhanced, and Iron Man, his only superpower is his wealth and technology. And essentially, we have these movies, it's the most prominent mythology of our age. And this idea of a League of Heroes is eventually, what it's doing is preparing people for the acceptance of not a rule by democracy, but a rule by the superheroes that are technocrats. It is essentially a technocracy. And most importantly, in Wernher von Braun's Mars project, he talks about how the Martian human colony would be a technocracy.
Right.
And so the connections obviously abound there.
So let's. I want to put Watchmen on the shelf because I want to get back to Chaos Magic and Alan Moore and everything that's in that, and all the superhero stuff you're talking about. But we've got to this technocratic party, and I really want to get to Elon von Braun because we'll get back. We can transition
focus
nicely.
The Watchmen on Elon now.
Yeah. But I want to get back to it. The technocratic party, I believe, like to use different names and numbers and to go by different names and numbers, which are eerily similar to the names that Elon gives his children. Am I wrong? Did you know about that?
What's that?
The people who are in the technocratic party, like Elon's grandfather in Canada, they went by names or codes that used weird numbers, symbols.
Shane,
and some
you're
of them,
telling me new stuff
and
here.
I believe some
crazy.
of them.
I did not know that.
Look, I could be wrong. If someone's out there can look it up real quick, but I believe you can look up what his grandfather's code name was or whatever they address each other with, and it was a weird symbol or bunch of names, or a bunch of letters and numbers put together, and a lot of them had like XS. So people are like, well, that's very similar to the weird names Elon's giving his kids. I don't know. It's weird to me. I think Elon's weird right now, but we'll get back to that. Let's go back to the technocratic party like you're saying. Canada, these guys wanted to install, these crazy, I guess people call them fascist technology geniuses. But even before that, I believe it was before that, or about the same time, von Braun, in 48, he's already been hired, I believe, by Paperclip. I think he's even here writing that book. Is he in America writing?
Yeah,
he's
in America. When he finishes the book, he's already in America.
So he's here after years of making crazy rockets and being Hitler's favorite scientist. He writes this book about mission to Mars, and it's kind of like, I haven't read it, but I believe it's kind of like his, kind of like a tutorial on how we could go about colonizing Mars, what could go on, but it's also kind of sci-fi, right? That's the best of my knowledge. And like we said earlier, there's an Elon involved. The Elon is the ruler of the government of Mars. So what's your take with that? Is that predictive programming? Is that something that von Braun was tapped into somehow?
Yeah.
And now, because when I tweeted out something about this a few weeks ago, and
I think that's the reason why we're doing this podcast.
That is someone out there, I forget who it was, whoever that was who connected us about this. Thank you. But a lot of the responses I was getting, some of them were, well, it's just a coincidence, that Elon. I'm like, it's a coincidence that this guy then also became a rocket scientist who wants to go to Mars. Like, you can't just. That's too
NASA.
far.
The guy who writes the book runs NASA. I had a hilarious podcast where I was talking about this, and the guy goes, "Oh yeah, don't you always say that Elon's an op because there was some science fiction writer who wrote about the Mars project and said Elon?" I'm like, it's not a science fiction writer. He was literally the face of NASA.
The face.
Who literally designed the fucking V2 rockets that took Apollo 11 to the moon.
Right.
So it's so funny that people do that. And now you have Elon just happens to be NASA doesn't actually do anything. NASA fails, and now you have Elon has to go save the fucking astronauts in their low Earth orbit. That's not even, past the Van Allen belt, but we can go into that later.
Yes.
But so he's in that way. Elon's not only fulfilling the role of Wernher von Braun, but also, and of course, Wernher von Braun's tombstone, hilarious. I believe it's a Psalm 19:1, which is literally the verse about the firmament.
That's right.
He just so happens to put that on his gravestone.
Like, come on, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. So Musk, he's fulfilling, I guess, to get back to the Watchmen and kind of Musk's role.
Yeah.
Musk, like we were talking about earlier, this JFK killing of the king, we talked about Abraham Lincoln's phallus. What was JFK's phallus? Was the phallus at the Kennedy Space Center, the space race that Kennedy started in the Great Cold War between when the world was a bipolar. There's two superpowers. In order to defeat them, we had to win the space race. So JFK starts the space race. It's fulfilled after his death. Finally, after all this oppressive, horrible stuff, MLK killed, JFK killed, Martin Luther King killed.
Everybody,
really hit it on the head there.
Right.
But the whole population traumatized, and then we finally have a win. Oh wow, we beat them in the space race. We went to the moon.
Right.
All from the Kennedy Space Center. Apollo 11 was Kennedy's dick, and it would be a lot harder to convince the American people that it happened if not for the emotional trauma and the hole that was caused by the assassination of JFK, which now Elon Musk, eventually, he basically is the successor to that legacy, and as a part of Trump's administration, much like RFK Jr. So you see, there's like 4 different levels that all tie into the same sacrifice, the same emotional trauma.
Yeah. Is that where you see his place with Trump, with Elon? Like, is he part of? Is he good, do you think? Is there such a thing as good? Because we can go into Watchmen with the idea of good and evil. But
everything's good for some people and bad for other people. There's never been a good time in history or a bad time in history. It's been good for some people, bad for some people, maybe better for a majority of people, in some ways worse. Would you rather be a peasant who at least gets to hang out with his family all day and have actual good work and be happy in general? Or would you rather, have nothing to do, have all your kids be depressed, kill themselves, cut their dicks off?
Seriously.
And, the stuff that we see today, there's always, people have this idea of technology advancing, equating to a better life in general, or things improving. Yeah, some things are improving, but other things, there's balance in the world. There's yin and yang. So this idea of good and bad, yes, Elon is good. I like his shit. I think went by a Cybertruck today. That shit's dope.
Yeah. It is. But it looks awesome.
It's, I like Twitter. Thank God he bought Twitter. If they left that alone, I'd be done. I wouldn't have a fucking income at all if they took away Twitter. So, I'm happy that he did it. It's definitely good for me. But I guess it's just important at the core of everything, like we talked about earlier, is the only thing that you actually have control over. And I think this is where the real question of free will goes to, is on a decentralized basis. Yes, each individual person has free will, but on a mass basis, the centralization of power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Mm-hmm. So there's, you can't really change, in certain ways you can, but you can't really change what goes on overall. You can't stop the precession of the equinox or these cycles from playing out. You could try. Right. But all you can do is position yourself correctly by being informed. And this actually goes back to the same myth of Horus, Osiris, and Set. Is when Horus is resurrected and fights Set, goes to defeat him after he killed Osiris, he was assisted, actually both sides, both Set and Horus, were assisted by the god of knowledge, Thoth. Which the Greeks called Hermes, and is basically the same. He represents esoteric knowledge. He represents all these things we're talking about, astrology and subconscious programming. It's all esoteric thought at the end of the day. Sigmund Freud, where we get propaganda from, is we have Sigmund Freud, his great nephew, Edward Bernays, writes the book Propaganda in 1928. And it basically, public relations comes out of that, advertising, and the Nazi, the whole cult of personality the Nazis were created were based off of these same methods of Bernays, the advertising methods that played off of his great uncle's work, which affects the subconsciousness. And then you have Edward Bernays' great uncle, which I believe it's Mark Randolph, who's the co-founder of Netflix.
No.
So yeah,
Really?
yeah, he's in the Bernays family. So you have the primary centralized form of propaganda is now happens to be run by the guy who wrote the propaganda book. So, and that just goes to show you these technocrats, it's complete bullshit. What happens is they have technology that is far superior to everyone else that they developed through the DARPA. Take, for instance, they had a project called LifeLog in the early 2000s, which was the idea that you could trick the population into giving you all their personal information so you didn't have to collect it. And what happened is they had Mark Zuckerberg. Oh, right. Wow. He came up with Facebook to get girls in college. Whoa,
we make a movie about you.
Movie about it. Oh, how cool. Oh, wow. What a great guy. Anyways, LifeLog shut down the day that Facebook was incorporated, and then all the employees from LifeLog went and worked.
Is that so?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Literally the same day, the exact same day. So they weren't trying to hide it. And then when you approach the, I believe the DARPA Twitter account, some intern was running it and people like pointed that out to them. It's one of the things I believe QAnon talked about it in a post specifically.
Right.
But they're the guys, if you're working in the same industry, of course DARPA is just going to have them go work. Well, it's comical. It's absolutely, Jeff Bezos, his grandfather.
I know that one.
Like the co-founder of DARPA.
Yeah.
Like one of the
that one's crazy too.
That ran the shit. So it's comical when you actually like zoom out. Bill Gates, of course, only got the huge $1 million IBM contract that started. Of course, IBM worked with the Nazis. Crazy corrupt industry.
Yep. Little known fact. People don't know the IBM Holocaust connection so much. I forget the name of that book. And they got the IBM computer. I think it's at the museum in DC. But it like helped compute and find the Jews, I guess, to bring into the camps.
Provided tech support the whole way through the war.
Right.
Just, are you having problems with your Holocaust camp programs? And of course, I think the word Holocaust, this is another fun fact, is it means complete burnt offering. So it's a sacrifice. It's a burnt sacrifice.
That's all this is. We're stuck in a revolving door of sacrifices carried out by crazy individuals. Epstein, for instance,
the day that the Holocaust was started was on, in the Jewish calendar, it's called the 9th of Av.
Okay.
It's the 9th day of their 11th month. And it's the day that they solemnly commemorate the falling of the two temples. You had Solomon's temple that was destroyed by the Babylonian Empire. Right. And then you had the second temple, Herod's temple, which was destroyed by the Romans. And just so happens, so this 9th of Av, it obviously the date in our calendar it changes every year. Just so happens that Epstein killed himself on the 9th of Av, 2019. And so I guess as a fun side note is Epstein was basically used as a sacrifice in order to create the QAnon lore behind Trump. Epstein killing himself basically was the huge, and what the attention that brought basically gave all the power to Trump to really make him seem as the opposition to the established order. But right. I forget what we were talking about. If you want to refocus,
we were on Elon and we were on von Braun. I was going to go into there's so many directions I want to go with this, but thinking of I guess we'll go here first. It's laughable how all this stuff seems to be carried out by the people that are hidden throughout the eras, in societies, but everything they do, they carry out so publicly. And I was laughing because it seems like it's so on the nose sometimes that, we can laugh about it. It's so ridiculous. but it's almost like it's set up to make us seem ridiculous to others who don't want to buy into it, right? Is that part, do you think that's part of why they do it so brazen? Like Caesar's in public, JFK in public, all these things are so public, and then or 9/11, and they play it over and over until it's like, your memory just becomes like it's a VCR in a loop. Is that, you think that's part of it, to make us sound crazy to people who don't care or don't want to accept that that's the reality?
Yeah, because everything's already in their subconscious. Like when you tell somebody about Von Braun being brought over in Operation Paperclip, in the Marvel movies, they call out Operation Paperclip by name. It's a huge plot point because you find out that the American intelligence agencies are being run by the Paperclip Nazis that were brought over. So which is literally,
I never saw them. How funny. That's crazy.
And so when people hear it, they're like, wait a second, wasn't that, I think I already heard this. It's in a movie. It's, this is ridiculous. I'm not even going to look into it. 9/11. I saw that in Super Mario Bros.
Right.
They had the buildings collapse, but yeah, there is an aspect of that. They talk about, if you want to get to the core of the philosophy, it all goes back to Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, which of course is, like we talked about with the rebranding of everything else. It's it's like learning physics from a Chinese school instead of an American school. It's the same actual laws, but people just put their own spin on it and they'll describe it in a different way. Maybe some people are more right about one thing than the other. But they talk about, there's one book called The Kabbalion, which is, it's technically on Hermeticism, but they just happen to choose a word that sounds exactly like Kabbalah because, again, they're very similar esoteric schools of thought.
Yep.
But they talk about there being different planes karmically. So there's these laws of karma. So, of course, karma just means action. So for each action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And they talk about there being two planes, the conscious and the subconscious. So if you can push it's like a pendulum swing is how they describe it. So you push the pendulum and you get what you want. The pendulum goes in the direction you want for a while. Take, for instance, you elect Barack Obama, push the pendulum that way.
Yep.
You can implement BLM and, do all types of other things, Obamacare.
Right.
But then eventually people are going to get pissed and the pendulum's going to swing on back. And now you have the guy who Obama said, at least I will be, Obama said, you'll never be president.
Right.
And of course, Trump started his most recent political career by literally, calling out Obama not being born in the country, which, by the way, that birth certificate is actually like completely fake to the point where the publicly released birth certificate, you can load it up into Photoshop and literally remove the layers that show his birthday. There's a whole press conference that a sheriff's office did on this. But
amazing.
Anyways, that's how Trump, started his career, was this pendulum swing. And anyways, with the Kabbalah, they talk about there being two planes. So you can't push a pendulum and not have it swing back at you, but you can push there's two planes. There's the conscious and the subconscious. So you could push the pendulum on the subconscious plane and dodge it, by being conscious of it. And that's effectively what they do by showing it, by implementing it into the mass pop culture, implementing these ideas in the mass pop culture and putting it into the subconscious. These are methods talked about by Sigmund Freud and Edward Bernays. Then you can, when it happens in real life, you avoid the consequences because they've already experienced the backswing. They already know. They're already used to this idea of the Twin Towers being attacked, or in the pandemic instance of there being a pandemic.
It's like psychological
vaccine and
right. It's almost like psychological time travel, but you don't know you're doing it. So they sent you to the future. You don't know you've been there. It's only because you've experienced it. And then when it actually happens, it's a memory from the past of the future you experienced. Does that make sense?
That's exactly correct. And that's again a core concept of not only esoteric philosophy, but of great inventors like Nikola Tesla. They talked about, obviously we have the three physical dimensions. You have the fourth dimension, which would be time, which is how we track and navigate, the movement of objects in 3 dimensions. Then beyond that, you have the 5th dimension, what Tesla called the luminous ether.
Right.
And, this is, again, it's not like he was the first person to say this, but, he was a big fan of Eastern esoteric thought, Buddhism and Hinduism and stuff like that, which they have these concepts in there. In Buddhist philosophy, they call it sunyata, which means nothingness, but it's not necessarily how we mean nothingness. They mean no thingness, which means there are no things. Everything is one thing, and all separation is an illusion. And basically, that concept would imply that time doesn't exist. So the only reason that we experience time is because we have a brain that can record past events. And of course, as we know, in experiments with eyewitness accounts, people haven't, there's one event that happens, but everybody remembers it in a different way. History, of course, his story, it's, of course, written by the victors, which,
Right.
Basically explains all of the, what we're taught in public school history.
Yeah.
So time, exactly, that's a great way of saying it. I'm going to take notes again, because that's a brilliant way of explaining it.
Thanks.
Because you've already put people in the future, when it happens in the present, they're completely used to it.
It's weird that we're under such attack all the time, and like, again, going back to the way we experience the aftermath of a situation like today with the Trump assassination attempt, supposedly, because who knows? It started off with 2 people exchanged gunfire. That was the reporting coming out, right? 2 people exchanged gunfire, then turned into, immediately, it was actually the Secret Service shooting at a supposed assassin. And it seems like everyone's got this way of trying to manipulate your perception that it seems like we're in peak chaos. I guess we've come here many times, maybe not us. Well, yeah, I guess we have. We've experienced 9/11 and all these other things. We have, but humanity has constantly. And it's like, is there a goal, or is this just a cycle? Do we just get to this point where we explode and war breaks out and there's mass suffering, sacrifice, and it calms down and we start over? Or is there, do you think there's a goal beyond that at some point?
It's, everyone's just playing their role. It's, there's, again, it goes back to that core question of free will, but on some level, these people understand that there's astrological cycles. So you don't have to go esoteric with it. Everything dies. Like I said, there's seasons. Every established order, every currency dies, every government dies. And there's a transition phase. So just like Osiris was killed, and they had to have Horus as a resurrection and continuation, everything eventually falls away. So what these guys position themselves for is they position themselves correctly for the next pendulum swing. And anyone who's smart enough to consult Thoth, just like how Thoth assisted both Set and Horus, if as long as you're pretty smart and you can get in contact with Thoth and figure out, what's going on, you can position yourself to do things like, one, not submit to the most powerful propaganda and social pressure campaign of all time with the vaccine, or do other things like have knowledge of the Federal Reserve and fiat currency and buy Bitcoin early.
Right.
And both of those things, who gives a fuck what happens to the rest of the world? You can't save the rest of the world. Right. You can try and spread information, which admittedly and selfishly is what I do to make a living.
Right.
I have helped a lot of people in that regard, but that's all you can do. If you want to go to the most, the deepest level of in terms of, is there good things happening or bad things happening? There's always good and bad things happening. You can position yourself to be effective on the individual decentralized level. On the centralized level, there's always going to be cycles. Of course, the government's going to collapse eventually, and we're going to need a new form of government. So, but there is people that are specifically trying to position themselves and put things into motion that are most advantageous to them.
It seems like that's a big reason why people like Elon and Trump are in the places they are, and under the amount of fire they are too. I'm curious what your take on this is. You brought up Tesla, and so then we have the connection between Trump and Elon and his Tesla, and we have Trump and his uncle, who I guess collected Nikola Tesla's stuff that he left over after he died. What do you make of that weird little connection?
Yeah, so this is a great transition because you talked about how this predictive programming is effectively time travel. The core predictive programming around Trump, including Captain America, in the Endgame, where Elon Musk, Iron Man, who of course Robert Downey Jr. literally said, "I'm basing the way I play Tony Stark off of the mannerisms of Elon Musk." Right. Elon Musk was in the second movie. He appears right after Tony Stark goes on stage at the Stark Expo. All the predictive programming with Trump, Captain America, he ends up sacrificing himself in his own way. He doesn't die necessarily, but he not only travels in time by being frozen and going to the future, but in the last movie, as the first Avenger, he uses an actual time machine to go into the past, and he lives out the past. And becomes an old man, which is why the new Captain America movie doesn't star the same character. And by the way, the new Captain America movie coming out was originally called Captain America: New World Order, and they had to change the title under pressure because people are saying it's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
I love it.
But that's one example of the time travel thing. With, of course, like you were mentioning, Trump's uncle. And in terms of, we talked about Musk and his grandfather with technocracy. If you want to tie Trump to the ruling class and this, ultra powerful deep state, which, we probably don't even know we have no idea who are the actual people behind this. Right. But his connection is that the FBI, after Tesla died on January 7th, 1943, if you can believe it, they took his, which is, by the way, it's the original date of Christmas as well, which before the switch to the modern calendar. That's just why the Greek Orthodox celebrate on January 7th.
Interesting.
But the FBI gave all the research to Dr. John Trump. That's right. Which, of course, Donald John Trump, that's his middle name. And he had an older brother, John. So I don't know, they were spamming Johns in that family for whatever reason. So they gave all Tesla's research. The FBI gave all Tesla's research to Dr. John Trump, who was an MIT professor who specialized in X-rays. And of course, he said, there's nothing in here. Complete, of course, BS fed to the public. And of course, if anyone had time travel or had an even more direct way of doing it than what we've been talking about, which I don't even think that needs to exist. Time is all on the mental plane anyway, so influencing people's consciousness in the now is effectively time traveling. You can convince people of the past and convince them of what's happening in the future. Right. And both those things will manifest and effectively be the true in the now. So he got that research, Trump's family. And he always talks about how much he talked to his uncle and how much he respected him. That's right. Then, in addition, in terms of, we talked about the Mars project with Musk, there's a very old book called, there's a guy, Ingersoll Lockwood. He was an occultist, obsessed with remaining young, actually. He included a picture in his book, a comparison picture of him at like 30 years old and like 70 years old, just to show off like how little he'd aged. Really? But yeah, that's a fun side note. But he wrote two books. One was Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. And very much like we've talked about with Musk and Caesar, where these names become titles, the Baron Trump in that book, he's the Baron Trump. He's a baron that happens to be Trump. That's not his name, unlike the Baron Trump that we know. And that actually explores a inner Earth journey that takes place in Russia, and there's all types of fun lore there. And then most effectively, and what really points to the Caesar programming, is the follow-up book, which I don't believe it's a series, but it's, it just happens to be one of the next books he wrote in 1898 is called The Last President. The title is either 1900 or The Last President. It's like an alternative, they went with different ones. But in The Last President, there's a member of the wealthy class in New York that happens to be able to gain the favor of the normal working class people. He takes power in a time of economic turmoil. There's riots by the communists, by the anti-fascists in the streets, and he just so happens to live on Fifth Avenue in New York. And yeah, so he's
it's bizarre.
Also in the Baron Trump book, there's also a guy named Don, the Don.
That's right.
Again, not Donald. He's just the Don.
Right.
But yeah, in this book, The Last President, this guy takes power, people riot, the dollar collapses, and they return to, I believe they do a silver standard, which seems like we're headed in a similar direction. They're going to have to change something.
Right.
At least the petrodollar is effectively dead. We're just seeing when the Fed cuts rates this month, we're going to see some crazy shit in that regard. But in the end of the book, the Capitol explodes, and then the all-seeing eye rises over the ashes of the Capitol.
Is it like metaphorically speaking, or is it like a literal?
No, in the book it's literal. Yeah,
no, shoot,
it's like a Sauron type deal.
Really?
Yeah. So anyways, that's the book, The Last President. That's written by the same guy that wrote Baron Trump's Marvelous and
So do you look at that as a way to help see what's going on too? Even though it's written literally with the all-seeing eye, like do you then interpret that metaphorically for what's to come, or do you see something more physical?
Talking about the U.S. dollar, I mean, look at this shit. They're not.
True that.
It is right there.
True that. Yep, it's right there the whole time.
Anut septis novos ordo seclorum, a new world order. And
you can't say that. We're going to change the name.
Isn't it possible?
They've been telling us forever.
All right, they've been telling us forever. What do you say,
Isn't it
Alex?
possible that they just named Baron after this book that Trump happened to love because there was a Don in it? I know we don't believe in coincidences.
Anything's possible.
It's the same thing that people say about
Elon.
About Elon, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, it is somewhat possible because, of course, technocracy. It was a small world back then, and there was a technocracy party in Germany, and certainly von Braun seemed interested in technocracy because that's how he thought his utopian Martian society should be ruled.
Right.
So it's possible that they were in contact, and that they wrote or that they read Elon's book, and Elon's mother was born in the same year that the book was written.
This
so,
is true. It's too much for me.
Obviously, his grandfather had a big influence, so it's possible they just did that and then happened to have all the power to make him play out the exact role of the character in the book or the title of the book.
Which to me is just is kind of just as crazy. So I'm going to try to transition now from an all-seeing eye rising up out of these ashes to a giant squid falling out of the sky. And then I want to say that maybe Elon Musk is Ozymandias. Like, aren't they kind of similar?
Yeah, well, so it's kind of a split thing because
he's also Dr. Manhattan.
Ozymandias, of course, is literally, I believe that's the Ozymandias, I believe, is the Greek name for, I forget which Egyptian pharaoh. Which is why that character Ozymandias, which is, I guess we'll back up for a second.
Yeah.
Ozymandias is a character. He's depending on who you ask, either the protagonist or the antagonist of the Watchmen. I guess more accurately, the antagonist. And he is a super rich guy that wants to. He wants to save the world. He's dedicated to saving the world, much like the rumors of what Elon Musk thinks his role is. I believe Grimes, his ex-wife, or I guess, I don't even know if they got married.
Whatever they are.
His baby mama, one of many. She claims that that's his mindset as well, is that he's supposed to save humanity. Right. Which I think is also, it's very accurate, but in a way. But anyways, this Ozymandias character, in order to save the world, and of course, I guess we'll we'll rewind. So, of course, Alan Moore, he writes this comic book series, this graphic novel series called The Watchmen. Very similar very similar idea to both the Justice League and the DC Comics and the Marvel Avengers. You have a League of Heroes, but Watchmen takes it a step further, where you still have some magical aspects, and you have to suspend belief in some ways in Avengers and DC, where Superman has divine powers, and you have Thor and Avengers and stuff like that. In Watchmen, everything is everything. They're just normal people in general.
Grounded.
Maybe they're a little stronger or whatever. But except for, and Ozymandias, importantly, is the same archetype as a Batman or an Iron Man, where his only power is his wealth and his technology. But they do have, so Ozymandias, in the end of the movie, in order to prevent nuclear war, because this comic book series written in the Cold War, so this was on everyone's mind, he prevents nuclear war by faking an alien invasion, by using a biologically engineered entity, a huge squid that he drops in New York that has this crazy mental bomb aspect where I think he melts everyone's minds or physically melts them. I forget exactly what they show in the comic book series. And this all goes back to, this is a common motif in terms of what conspiracy theorists talk about, the ultimate goal of an alien invasion being, and it's something that Ronald Reagan actually talked about in a speech, I believe, at the United Nations. He specifically said, imagine a world where, we are attacked by a threat from outside of our planet, and how quickly all of our differences would fade away. Of course, his vice president was Bush Sr., so, he's about as tied in as anyone else.
Yep.
And, of course, he went to Bohemian Grove. But Bill Clinton repeated that exact same phrase, I believe, on Jimmy Kimmel a couple decades later.
Oh, wow.
But literally, to the point where you can, it's so cheesy how he says it, because you can tell it's rehearsed. Oh, imagine. And he stops to think, imagine how all of our problems would fade away. Right. We were just faced by an outside threat. Right. I believe today we also had an announcement that they're going to have another UFO hearing.
Oh, wow. I didn't even see that yet. Great.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I guess it's based around there being a UFO sighting around a nuclear facility, a nuclear weapons facility.
Shocking. I've heard that story before.
So it's a connection between the ended World War II and basically established. And this is perfect because it goes back to Watchmen. Because after World War II, nobody would threaten the United States because we had our secret weapon. We had the Manhattan Project.
Right.
Go into the Watchmen, how they represent the Watchmen, and they represent that concept in the Watchmen is with Dr. Manhattan, a scientist who accidentally gets mutated in I believe, a nuclear reactor of some kind, some type of radiation. He was locked in the chamber, and gets hit with this crazy radiation, and it turns him into an Ubermensch, turns him into a god, a Superman, which you've seen. It's hilarious because not only does Elon Musk tweet pictures of Dr. Manhattan, but Dr. Manhattan's Fortress of Solitude equivalent was on Mars. He would go to Mars to hang out, and that's exactly
to get away from humans
that Musk tweets.
Yep.
And of course, like I said earlier, Alan Moore, he talks about, people think there's grand conspiracy theory or grand conspiracies, but really it's all chaos. And he said, my art is chaos magic.
Right.
So, but I guess Dr. Manhattan, the important part about him is also in the comics, and I don't know how they stuffed this all in there, but Dr. Manhattan happens to be responsible for the Earth's transition to electric vehicles.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. That's crazy.
What are you doing?
That's
dude?
crazy.
How obvious are you going to make this shit?
So you're saying you see Elon in both, obviously, Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias?
It's split. Yeah. It's that's true. Archetypally, it's almost like that one fuses the two archetypes we were talking about, the Superman versus Batman.
Yeah.
Where there's, in some ways, both Captain America and Dr. Manhattan are a result of science. In other ways, they're more, natural and not directly technology necessarily.
Yeah.
But in some way, they're both a result of science. Dr. Manhattan gets his superpowers from science in the same way that Iron Man would, just in a different, and Captain America, just in a different kind of.
And Elon is kind of creating a superhuman with Neuralink, right? That's the future of Neuralink could, I think it will, create another type of Superman, super soldier, whatever.
Yeah, transhumanist, technocratic, New World Order.
Right,
that's what they're preparing us for.
Which is what his grandfather's been talking about for a long time, Elon. And then also the squid, the way Ozymandias justifies dropping the squid on people, he kills all these people, right? It's like hundreds of thousands of people in the city, but he's saying he's doing it for good. That's also kind of makes me think about Neuralink as well, because Neuralink is for good. Like when we talk about it right now, we can give people their ability to walk, their ability to see, but there's something in the future I think it's going to actually destroy humanity, but Ozymandias thinks it's saving humanity, and like we've been talking about the whole episode, you keep saying it's good for some people, it's bad for others. It's good and bad is subjective depending on who you are, and that's where I kind of follow.
You always have a choice. There's ultimately always a choice. And what's coming, the ultimate deception that's dealing with transhumanism. It's basically we're entering. So this idea of a utopia, it's what people have been searching for forever. It's part of the ethos behind even the colonization of North America. Francis Bacon, the primary occultist of I believe King James, same guy who commissioned the English Bible, the King James Bible. Francis Bacon is rumored to be a huge part of the translation and also might have written all of Shakespeare's works. But he also wrote a book called New Atlantis, which is about colonizing America and creating a utopia there. He inspired Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson talks about how much he was inspired by Francis Bacon. But yeah, they want to form this, ultimately this utopia. The problem is if you remove they talk about this in The Matrix, why in the Matrix movies, of course, fun fact, the directors, that they used to be brothers, now they're sisters.
That's right.
The same directors that directed Matrix also directed V for Vendetta.
Which,
by the way, V for Vendetta, not only do they march on the Capitol saying, remember the 5th of November in masks, the government took power in the movie. It's revealed the major plot point is that the pandemic that caused the centralization of power was actually a bioweapon created by the government. So it's come on, Alan, you ain't fooling nobody, bro. Definitely MI6 connected, and of course his daddy, fucking Crowley, also had MI6 connection.
His magician daddy. Yeah.
And by the way, this is one connection I'll make real quick.
Yeah.
Jack Parsons, the founder of Jet Propulsion Labs, JPL, still in operation today, still has a huge part in NASA and SpaceX. Basically, this guy, Jack Parsons, invented liquid rocket fuel. He was a great pen pal of Wernher von Braun. In the Marvel movies, they based the character of Tony Stark's dad, who not only creates Tony Stark effectively, but also creates Captain America. They base his character exactly off of Jack Parsons and his role in the films as a part of the secret government underbelly of secret technology, advanced technology. It fits perfectly. In addition to that, in the comics, most recently, they released a comic that says that Tony Stark's dad, this Jack Parsons character, was a Satanist who made a deal with the devil to make his son the smartest man on earth, which, of course, is directly, you have Jack Parsons he's a cultist, he was a student of Aleister Crowley, and he did a ritual in the Mojave Desert in 1946 called the Moonchild Ritual, based off a book by Aleister Crowley that was about a leader of the New Aeon, New Age, we called it the Age of Horus, that would rise, and basically he went into the desert and did this ritual with the help of Mr. Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Which Scientology's lore, when you get to the top, they tell you, hey, where actually it's all about aliens.
That's right.
And these spirits inhabit you called Phaetons, not to be confused with Thanos.
Right.
And our main patriarch alien god, Xenu with a big X, he was obsessed with depopulation because his planet was overpopulated. So he took half of the population, brought it to Earth, threw them in supervolcanoes, and basically it blew them up with thermonuclear bombs, which is exactly what happens in the Marvel movies. It's exactly what Iron Man defeats in the end, is an obsessed alien with depopulation whose planet was already threatened by overpopulation, and he wants to destroy exactly half. So that's the end game, is they've used Hollywood, which Scientology controls. Tom Cruise was actually supposed to be Iron Man. They wanted Tom Cruise. They didn't have enough money.
Right.
The first Iron Man movie was funded and written also but with the help of the U.S. military, which a lot of people don't know. But if you search like movies that were assisted by the U.S. military, you'll find the first Iron Man movie. And yeah, so anyways, Jack Parsons, huge part of it. Crowley and his other student, Alan Moore, was writing the other stuff, and they controlled Hollywood.
It seems like
NASA, Hollywood, and that's how you manifest the future by controlling the technology.
And then, by the way, to cover it up, but also keep it public is, we talk about the Mars Project book or the Ingersoll Lockwood books. It's like it starts as these archetypes in the culture, but then it's reality. And then the reality gets turned into mythology, whether it's a fiction or movies. And then it's just, that's the narrative kind of goes into the ether for the general public. Like you were saying earlier, when you see Paperclip in a Marvel movie, it immediately kind of turns Paperclip into a cartoon to a degree for people's, and they don't realize no, it's beyond that. Like, this is legit. We hired Nazis to go to do these things. It's really interesting. And then, and going back to what you were saying about Parsons, Crowley, and stuff, and Elon, is it weird to you that Elon's profile picture doesn't have isn't he wearing a costume that has Satan on it or some devil character?
Yeah, it's a character from the video game. I forget what it is. It's a very popular video game, and it's one of his favorite video games. He talks about playing all the time. It's a whole different thing. Weird. That we could tie into one of his previous profile pictures, again showing directly how he's kind of manifesting archetypes from pop culture. But the costume is called Satan's Champion. Oh. And it has a upside down cross, and of course Baphomet, a depiction of Baphomet, on it. And that's out of all the things you could choose as somebody who wants to rise up and be the leader of freedom and have everybody, look up to you.
Bizarre.
As a savior, you're gonna keep your. I get it, cool. It's a video game, but bro, you're gonna be Devil's Champion. The Devil's Champion is what you want everybody to think of. One side note, though, and this is fun. It ties into everything else. Is that one of his profile pictures that he changed to during the pandemic was the cover of a game called Deus Ex, and Deus Ex. Main character happens to have basically the exact same phenotype as Elon Musk, with sunglasses. It looks the exact same. And I think that's part of the reason why he made it. But in this game, Deus Ex, which came out in 2000, the game takes place in New York City, but what you'll notice in the game is what's missing from the New York skyline is the Twin Towers, because they've already been destroyed by a terrorist event.
Wow.
And it's a game where you go through, he's a government agent, the main character that Elon Musk made his profile picture. It's a government agent that turns on the government when he learns that the pandemic, that centralized power, was actually a government bioweapon. And it's a great game. Just listening to the dialogue, they literally lay out in the game Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and they explain the Council of Foreign Relations. And it's a fantastic game, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, it's just a coincidence. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were just having fun with the game. But of course, he's a transhumanist android as well, which is a fun aspect. And one last thing, Deus Ex. This refers to, if you want to really get to the core of what Elon Musk represents, is the title Deus Ex refers to a plot device in Greek plays called Deus Ex Machina, God out of the machine. That's right. Where they would literally drop when the movie, or when the play seemed to be at its absolute worst, where there's no hope, all of a sudden they drop a literal God on wires out of the machine. They drop it onto the stage, and the savior saves everything. Right when the world seemed most hopeless, he buys X and resurrects Donald Trump Osiris right after he was killed and miraculously saved. After,
so are we watching for more of that in the coming weeks, months? Because when you said that, I also think of something like Project Bluebeam. People talk about falsifying a return or alien. You said earlier faking an alien invasion. Is that something you think is on your list?
End game.
Yeah.
So Wernher von Braun, his close assistant, I believe her name is Carol Rosen. She is on record in an interview saying that on his deathbed, of course, we've already talked about what his gravestone was, which seems to indicate that he was, looking to drop some secrets right before he died. Mm-hmm. On his deathbed, he tells her, listen, after, we have the Cold War, we have terrorism, we have third world crazies like in North Korea, Iran, nuclear power crazies. The final end game is a fake alien invasion. And this is what he tells his assistant. Great. He says there'll be a fake alien invasion that they'll use because when there's an alien invasion, you have to unite the governments of the world in order to oppose them, just like Reagan and Bill Clinton said. Mm-hmm. And on top of all this, of course, Will Smith, the lead actor in Independence Day, of course, unlike Tom Cruise, he's not a public Scientologist. Right. But what you find is him and his wife, his fucking crazy bitch wife, they were running a Scientology school out of one of their houses in Hollywood Hills for their kids, if you want to know why their kids are so fucked up. But yeah, so
wow,
that is how they control. It all goes back to Parsons, von Braun, Crowley, Hubbard.
Yeah. Because
of the influence, you have Scientology controlling Hollywood. Think of all the movies Tom Cruise was in, and of course Iron Man he was supposed to be in. You've got Parsons, NASA, and then Stan Lee writes him into fucking the Marvel lore,
right?
And then of course you have von Braun as the face of NASA, effectively working, of course, with Walt Disney on fictional programs that psychologically prepared the American people to what to look for in the space landing. Now, here's where it ties back. I remember now what we wanted to talk about was the alien invasion.
Yeah.
This ties it all together. There's a guy, of course, who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick, that came out just months before the Apollo 11 landings went on TV. People always say, "Oh, this is why people say Stanley Kubrick directed the Apollo 11 moon landings." Because if you watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, it looks more realistic than the
100%.
Than the moon landing.
100%.
And but the guy who wrote the actual script for 2001: A Space Odyssey also wrote a book called Childhood's End. And in Childhood's End, and I think this is the most likely scenario. I know I was talking about how they give you a fear porn scenario, and then the reality is actually much lighter. So, for instance, you have Contagion, where the pandemic is actually super deadly and does actually kill everybody, as opposed to, having a slightly higher, kill rate than the flu.
Yeah.
They have Independence Day, which is the fear porn scenario of an alien invasion. But The Childhood's End, now this is a book by same guy who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, and they wanted to make a movie out of it because obviously he was like on a roll after 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Right.
Arthur C. Clarke, a major sci-fi writer of the time, but this movie Childhood's End, or this book rather, it only got made into a TV show in like 2010. But the plot of this is a alien race decloaks their spaceships over the major cities of the world and prevents nuclear war. Again, in the time of nuclear, in the Cold War. Mm-hmm. So they end the possibility of nuclear war, just like Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias. And they give humanity technology, they end war, they end hunger, they give us technology and health, they extend the lifespan of humanity. The only stipulation is they never reveal themselves. They never reveal their corporal form to humanity. And they have a liaison that they, a human that they bring up and who is basically their spokesperson. And of course, it's not like humanity has much of a choice. They've deactivated all their weapons and they have massive technological superiority. But basically what happens in the book is people, they lose without, in a secular world, when you have all your problems, all your human problems fall away, you don't even value yourself at that point. So suicide, going crazy, which you can see a manifestation of this happening already.
Oh yeah.
And you create problems, confusion, because you've lost the yin and yang of the world, which is again what they talk about in the Matrix. They say the first simulations in the Matrix, they put these people in were utopias, but people didn't accept it as reality. They couldn't stand it.
Right.
And that's basically what ends up playing out. And what they find out, though, in Childhood's End, the big kicker, is everyone's lifespan's expanded, but at a certain point, they find out that everyone's sterilized. So they can't have a Childhood's End, which there's also a Children of Men, I believe. Have you seen that? It's a more recent movie. I think.
Is that the one with the last kid or so that woman has a baby and they're trying to protect the baby for the whole movie? Yeah.
Immediately following a pandemic the movie universe, following a pandemic in 2008. In the book that it's based off of, though, it takes place in 2021, the same year that the vaccine was released.
No, man.
And I guess to get to the point, though, that is the most likely scenario. I see the aliens coming in a much, maybe they let off a firework, which going back to the Watchmen, the major difference between the comic book and the movie is in the comic book, they have the alien, but in the movie, they decided, it'd play better if if they put off a bunch of nuclear explosions in major cities and then blame Dr. Manhattan and make Dr. Manhattan the bad guy that unites the world in opposition. So maybe they'll let off a firework. We've got Israel, Iran, and of course Russia all going at once. So there's plenty of nuclear, low key, if people wouldn't like to admit it, especially people that are really gung ho about the Ukraine war. Of course, as a tenant Russian paid propagandist, I'm going to say this, but
oh boy. Now I have to pull the cord.
Yeah, thanks for that free flight out, Tim. The hotel stay. Best Westin. Thanks, Putin.
Keep Tim's name out your motherfucking mouth.
They're out here listening now. But they always have. They've been wiretapping all of us since birth. It's funny when you're talking about Childhood's End, you're talking about the way the aliens turned off all the technology. Another bit of predictive programming I feel like I've been seeing is the supposed coming internet apocalypse that they might blame, they blame the sun for it or something. So I feel like I feel we get a blue beam situation coupled with the internet going out because they realized how good a lot of us were at subverting their power during COVID with the internet, right? And then so Elon buying X is a huge blow to the narrative that they want because obviously now we can use X somewhat freely. I still have lots of issues with it, but it's better in a lot of ways. So yeah, I do feel, and if I tell someone, like I was saying in the very beginning of the show, if I say something like to them about paperclip, and they're like, "That sounds crazy," and then if I say something to them about Bluebeam, they say that's crazy. I'm like, they just shut the whole world down a few years ago. Like literally anything's possible. The whole world died, and then they forced an injection on a lot of you. Anything's possible. And you're also talking about the predictive programming of the movies and Scientology, and you made me think of War of the Worlds. Everyone that thinks of War of the Worlds, they also think about the radio broadcasts and what it supposedly did. I have it somewhere on vinyl, the articles that were written after the broadcast went live and people freaked out. We're primed for some crazy shit.
I looked into that, when I was looking at the origins of kind of like where do we get these cultural ideas of alien invasions. And what's interesting is they didn't those aliens in War of Worlds, it wasn't UFOs. They were like basically missiles. They were like cannons. They were saying the Martians were basically launching these effectively rockets, I guess, that were crashing into Earth. And that's where the aliens were coming from.
Interesting.
The whole UFO thing was kind of like an after effect that they only started doing once to be frank, once the Nazis had created anti-gravitic craft and were flying them around. That's what the phrase Foo Fighters, of course. That was in reference to these unidentified flying objects over the battlefields in Europe. And that's also after that happened. Then to cover it up, they were like, "Okay, shit, let's run this up with the whole alien motif quick." And then, of course, these same, just like in the Marvel movies, where they have the advanced Nazis that come over and control the U.S. Take over. That's essentially when we do have this alien invasion. They're going to present us with some android biological entity, just like Ozymandias made. Which the Greys, that's the whole, all that shit. They're definitely androids, and some crazy biological creation. And that's actually in Deus Ex. That's another fun part of Deus Ex, is they have the Greys in Deus Ex. They've made, like, the aliens have made contact, but then you find out in the game, they're actually just government biological entity androids that they created in order to distract people from the actual ruling class. And essentially, when this alien invasion happens and they give us all this technology they've been sitting on, which, like we said before, they've kind of done in a way through DARPA. They slowly leak us out, a little DARPA something, little Facebook, little Amazon. Every once in a while, they're going to give us all this dope shit. And but in reality, what's going to happen is it's just a kind of public and fulfillment of what the ruling class has always been, is these, they have this breakaway civilization with advanced technology, and they're, once they've sterilized us, which, whether or not the vaccine was kind of a kill shot to that, you don't even need the vaccine to see that fertility rates were already dropping before. Sure. So I think we're running right into the childhood Zen scenario, and we're going to have, you're unable to reproduce, and you have all this technology, and this goes back to the individual basis. It'll be very bad for people who don't have any concept of spirituality or God or any type of value of human life or spirit. They will immediately tap into Neuralink and go into a virtual reality and, go straight Matrix mode. But anybody who values themselves and the connection with the divine, are going to reject it. And that's ultimately that's the final, test. Then it's literally, they trap souls like that.
Well, Drew, that's a great place to end. I want people to take away that. That's like the greatest way to prepare for all the chaos to come. And there's going to be a lot of it, as there always is. Man, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. Where can people find you? Where can they find your books?
So yeah, I'm on Twitter at Drutang Reborn, and I've got I just did another print run of my book, but I've got a dozen or so copies left. So I do all the sales through DM. So if you do want a copy of my first book, I'll be printing my second book soon. But yeah, you can just DM me if you're interested, and check out my my Twitter for content, and search through it for. If you use any of the keywords of any of the topics that we've talked about, Elon's made it pretty easy to search people's profiles now, thank God. So you just go onto my profile and you can search any keyword in, and you'll find a wealth of information on and supporting documents on basically anything we've talked about today. Yeah, it's awesome. You got a lot of great stuff out there. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, man. Have a great one. Bye, Jim. Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thanks. Later. Man. Prepare for Blue Beam, everybody. I'm just sitting here thinking about The Purge. Purge. Have you ever seen it? I did see it a long time. I saw one of them a long time ago. I mean, it's like probably the most realistic horror movie and scenario that could actually happen. I mean, I remember thinking of The Purge the night that one of the George Floyd riots broke out, and I saw David Dorn, get shot in the head by rioters, and David Dorn was just protecting, I think, his friends, like. Not a vintage shop, like a pawn shop or something. I'm like, wow, we're in total anarchic hell
right
Did you ever
now.
think like, are you going to be the person that just wants to hide in a bunker, or are you going to go out there and
it depends on the day. No, since having the family, I'm going to do my best to just defend and hold
really?
down the fort. That's what I gotta do. I'm not going to go out.
Not going to go out and do bad things.
stuff unless at that point someone has done something that that might deserve it.
I wish Tim was building a bunker.
Well, you got to build your own. You got to just it's
Okay.
it's di bring your own bunker, BYOB. That works out. It's BYOB. Bring your own bunker. So we've had a lot of crazy stuff happen in this house. It's been pretty good, knock on wood.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's real wood.
559 came and went today, and not really any problems.
And remember early on, and you said this in the Slack earlier yesterday or something, someone said that you were being like haunted by a little boy.
Yeah, we had a caller call in saying that, there was definitely spirits lurking, and there was maybe a little boy or a young child taunting me.
And I was pretty sure he might have been like the ghost gnawing at the cables. Early issues. It wasn't like human error or anything.
I was like, this makes sense, because it's like stupid nonsense.
Right.
So it makes sense if it's a child.
What happened just yesterday?
Yeah, one of our coworkers unearthed some graves on the property.
Like old. We're laughing about it, but they're old graves. Okay, so it's like it's not like it just happened the other day. They're old graves. And
they're really old.
Shout out to Brian for that. But one of them was a little boy, I believe.
I couldn't really tell.
It looks like one of them was a young child.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's the one bothering Alex.
Yeah.
So
it's real. It's for real.
But we've been cool ever since,
Yeah, we've been good.
It's been a few episodes. We haven't really seen much. The demon door has been shut, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I think Tim hired someone to just weld it shut. So it's totally, you can't, if someone opens it, we're totally screwed.
Yeah.
But man, that was fun.
Yeah, that was man.
Crazy.
I don't really watch the Marvel movies, even though my kids are really into Spider-Man.
I haven't seen many of them. I've seen one or two. I didn't know that they mentioned Paperclip in the one or a few of my guests. But I think it's there's a lot of clues, I do believe, hidden in a lot of those movies that do come true. And it's weird. I don't think he even mentioned, because it's such a little aside, but in The Matrix, for those who don't know, I feel like everyone knows this now, Neo's ID says, I think it expires on 9/11, 2001.
Really? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
Oh, and by the way, the aliens will be pugs. That's all I'm going to They're going to come in pug form.
You would say that. You'll accept them then? If you're pugs.
Yeah, they're pugs. And it makes sense,
Yeah, they look like aliens.
Yeah, well, and Will Smith.
Men in Black.
Men in Black, yeah.
Yep. Every time I see a pug, I'm like, yep.
I have a pug, so I know.
You live with aliens.
I do. I live with an alien.
Oh, geez. What are you going to do? Well, that was fun.
Cute. Yeah, it was fun. Good times.
Where can they find you?
You can try and find me on X.
Every week I try to just badger you onto the internet
every week I'm like, you know what? I'm going to post something right before we go live, and I just don't. I am Alex Ayala on X.
I'm Shane Cashman on X and all those other deranged places. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week.